we were going over the rules and everything, preparing to get started. Bill Scott was the timer in our room. And let me tell you something, he had it going on. There was a big crowd there, and he was firing off one line after one line. I was afraid we weren't going to be able to get started on time because Bill was on such a roll. Finally, I said to him, I said, Bill, every other room has started. We got to get going. If you're out of material, we'd like to get started. Bill says, okay. One more thing though, is everybody make sure your cell phones are off. Well, thank God, Bill, that's pretty good advice. Send us off on a note, constructive. 2 speakers in. Guess whose cell phone was? Bill Scott. He's got it in his jacket, and he's buttoning up his jacket, giving it a chicken wing. Doesn't matter. So the speaker finishes, and the speaker just plowed through. She was ignoring Bill, and everything. But I called Bill over. I said, Bill, tell you what, why don't we turn this cell phone off? He said, well, I got a better idea. Why don't you just hold it? So if it goes off again, that's the type of friend Bill Scott is. But having said that, that's kind of a long roundabout way of saying if you do have a cell phone on, let's go ahead and turn that off right now, or put it on vibrate or anything, so we don't interrupt our speaker or anything.
You know what this means?
I'm well versed in what that means, Bill. Our speaker tonight is getting ready to start her senior year at Bluffton University in Ohio. And they have kind of an interesting part of their curriculum that they ask their students to do. And I told her, I really thought that was a good idea for today's youth. I'm glad they didn't do it when I was in school. But I do think it's good for them. But I'm not going to go into any more details because I'm sure she can explain it a lot better than I can. Natalie Nikitas.
Evening, everyone. Just really quickly, thank you for Celery. She kind of set this up for you all to have me here. I asked her to help me out with the trip's expenses, and of course she obliged because she's just a nice lady like that, and she brought me here for you all tonight. So hope I don't disappoint, especially for her. She's so kind. So thank you, Celery. And as Chris said, my name is Natalie Nikitas. I'm Nick Nikitas' daughter, who I think most of you in this room know him and have talked to him already. And Carla Nikitas back there is my mom. They don't sit together. They just choose not to. They like that distance. They get along better. Yeah, they get along better. But as Chris kind of mentioned, I attend Bluffton University in Ohio. And when I first went to orientation, they mentioned something about a cross-cultural. And as a freshman going to college to play softball, my mind was in high gear about I'm going to play a college sport, meeting all these new teammates. I'm going to be living on my own, 4 hours away from home, 18 years old. I'm living the high life. So the whole cross-cultural aspect didn't really hit me until this past year when we had to sign up. And so when the list of places came out, there's places such as San Antonio, the Gulf Coast, down in New Orleans, Chicago, and then also international trips like China, Botswana, Africa, Bolivia, Trinidad, and Tobago. So they had about 9 choices, and so all my friends got together and they were talking about it, talking back and forth, and they were all set on going to San Antonio because they wanted to go get some sun, they wanted to go down to Mexico and just have a grand time, and it was a cheaper trip. And so I was like, well, yeah, I guess I can go with you all to San Antonio. That sounds fun. Go with 15 of my best friends down to San Antonio for 3 weeks. Sure, why not? So the morning of the decision, we had to wake up at about 6:45, and in a college student's eyes, that's pretty early. And so we woke up at 6:45 in the morning, got on the computer, and waited till it opened up where we could click and vote on what trip we wanted to go on most. And so it was my turn on the laptop, and I was looking, and I was like, San Antonio, no. Well, what about Africa? Sure, let's just write down Africa as my first choice. So I clicked it as number 1, and I picked 2 other trips and just sent it in, went back to sleep, woke up, went to class, didn't think anything about it. So about 3 weeks later, I got an email and it said, "Congratulations, you've been chosen to go to Botswana, Africa." And then it kind of started setting in, and I was, okay, I did, yeah, 7 o'clock in the morning. I guess that was a good idea back then, and now it's kind of hitting home. And so my next thought was, how am I going to tell my mom? Because I knew she probably wouldn't be too excited. And so I kind of waited a little bit until I was actually home with her and said, yeah, I chose to go to Africa. You what? You chose to go to Africa? Yeah, I chose to go to Africa. Well, do you need shots to go over there? Are you sure you can go over there? Aren't they fighting over there? So I had to say, no, it's fine, it's safe, I promise. No shots, we're good. So come May 7th of this year, after a lot of requests from family members, friends to help me out with the expenses, I boarded a bus that drove from Bluffton, Ohio, an hour and a half north to Detroit, Michigan, and we boarded a plane that flew us down to Atlanta, and from Atlanta we boarded a Delta International flight and flew for roughly 16 and a half hours. Yeah, not fun. They had a lot of movies on that flight, but it wasn't too comfortable trying to sleep upright. But we flew down to Johannesburg, South Africa, which is a huge and beautiful airport. From there, we took a flight that I think had about 20 people on it to Gaborone, Botswana, which is their capital city. And for those of you who don't know, Botswana is right above South Africa. It's a landlocked country. So we flew into Gaborone, stayed the night, didn't really see much of anything because it was dark. So we woke up the next morning, everyone got dressed. The women, we were required to wear floor-length skirts just to be considerate of the people we were staying with. And we drove 2 hours to Pitsing, Botswana. So if you can picture Africa and everything that you've ever heard about Africa, Pitsing is probably pretty close to what you're picturing. We drove up to just sand everywhere. We keep driving. I'm getting a little worried that our driver's lost and she doesn't know where she's going, but all of a sudden we stop, and just like in the movies, about 100 kids just rush this van that we're in. And they're just running, no shoes, torn shirts, just running and smiling and waving at us. And so all of us are just looking out the windows like, are we here? And we were there. So we opened up the car door to all these kids just jumping on us and hugging us and laughing and just running around and playing with us. And so after that, we drove around the village, which was sand, and the houses were huts, and most of those had thatched roofs. And I mean, goats, cows, chickens, running around just everywhere. In the middle of the road, you had to stop and wait until they would cross, and then you could keep going. You'd see people out running, chasing their goats to get them back into their little areas. But so we got off, we unloaded all of our luggage, walked around, and we met. Each of us was assigned a host family. There was 8 students, and each of us individually were assigned a host family. So it got to my turn, and I was nervous because I was like, I'm living with these people for the next 2 weeks, and that's pretty nerve-wracking. You never met. They don't speak any English. I don't speak any Setswana, which is what they speak, and yet I'm going to be living with them for 2 weeks. So I go up, and they're lined up, they're sitting, waiting for me, and I go up and I make the first cultural mistake. I go up to my host mom first to shake her hand. Well, that's a big no-no. You go and shake the eldest male, the head of the family's hand first. So already I was off to a bad start, and I just kind of had to laugh and say sorry, and of course they didn't understand, so they just laughed back, and I shook their hands down the row, went back. We hung out a little bit together as a group, and then one by one we drove back through the village and dropped each other off. And so it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We got to my house, and our instructor, the professor that had gone with us, well, she was dropped off about 2 blocks away and said, "You guys will be okay, right?" And the 4 of us left. We were like, yeah, we'll be okay. She said, "Okay, we'll see you tomorrow morning." Okay, so we drove, and they unloaded me and waved goodbye and drove off, and there I was at 4:30 in the afternoon in a remote African village with my new family. And so, yeah, I was very nervous. I loaded all of my luggage, which was a bag about this big, that had everything that I would live on for the next month in rural Africa. And I walked in and unloaded my stuff in my hut. I had my own individual hut, which was really nice. It had a tiled roof, which I was very thankful for, so none of the bugs could get in the thatched roof and fall on me while I was sleeping. I wouldn't want that. And I unloaded that, went back out to the fire, which was their meeting place, and sat with my new host brother and host aunt as we kind of tried to communicate in a very elementary type setting, because I would point at the fire and be like, fire, and they would laugh and they would say, Olelo. And so that's what we did the rest of the night. I would point and say cow, and they would say kumu. So the first night there, I'd try to learn Setswana and have them kind of like me. And so for the next 2 weeks, we kind of did the same routine. I would wake up at about 5:30 to the sounds of roosters, chickens, cows, everything running around, and the noises of my little siblings running around. I would get dressed. My host mom would come and knock on the door, and I would let her in, and she'd bring me up a pail. And inside the pail would be about this much water that had been heated up over the open fire, because there was no electricity or any way of heating up fire or the water without fire. So I'd let her in, and she would pour this water into a basin for me, and the basin was probably about this big around. And that was my bathtub for the next 2 weeks. It had just enough room for me to stand in it, and that's about it. So she would pour the water in, and I would get about 1.5 to 1 inch, because they were in the middle of a drought, so water was kind of scarce. So I get about that much, and then she'd leave me, and I would proceed to take a kind of awkward bath that didn't really ever work out, but it was okay. And then get dressed, I would go outside to the fire, and there they would have my food waiting for me. And everybody's always interested in, what'd you eat when you were over there? It's Africa, what'd you eat? Well, it wasn't McDonald's or anything like that, that's for sure. So wake up, and their main staple is porridge. And so they call it matoho. And so I wake up and go outside, and my host mom would be stirring it in a big pot, and then she'd pour it into a bowl for me, and they give me so much of this matoho. And then she'd set it down, and she would pour in milk and about half a cup of sugar in it for me and stir it up and hand it to me. And so that's what I had every morning for breakfast. And basically, the best way I can describe it, it tastes like plain oatmeal, only a lot grittier, and it has a lot of sand in it just because there's sand everywhere. But it wasn't too bad, except for after the first morning, I had this matoho, and I was like, this isn't bad. I can survive on this. It's kind of okay. Well, then the next morning, I woke up and went outside and was ready for my big bowl of matoho, and my host mom handed it to me, and I poured in my sugar and my milk, and I was getting ready to take a bite, and I took a bite, and something was off. I was like, wow. So I started up again, added a little bit more sugar, took another bite. Something was really bad. Oh, man. And she looked at me and she said, in Setswana, sour milk. And I was like, oh. And I had heard of this sour porridge from people who had gone the trip previously, and they were just like, stay far away from this sour porridge. And basically what it is they would have milk, and they would set it out until it would sour, and then put that into the porridge, because to them it was like a delicacy. It was like having some yogurt and granola in the morning for breakfast. To them it was just sour milk. And so she gave me a huge hunk of it right in my porridge, stirred it up. I was like, oh. And I tried my very best. I ate about 10 bites, and then I was just like, okotsi, which is I'm full. I was like, I'm full. And she like looked at it, and then I told her, and said something. I was like, I don't like sour milk. And she's like, you don't like sour milk? I was like, no. And okay, so thankfully the rest of the trip I did not have to endure any more sour porridge. Thank goodness for my appetite. But besides the food, which really wasn't that bad, a lot of vegetables, another thing that we did, we took classes every morning. So after I ate with my host family, I would go to a meeting place with the rest of the kids from Bluffton, and we would have Setswana lessons. And we'd have these lessons for about 4 hours a day, so we could try to communicate with our host families. And so we'd all be writing in our journals, and then I would go home and try to speak Setswana to like the kids and the adults, and they would just laugh and laugh, because of course I was speaking it completely wrong. But the kids really were the only way that I could communicate with my host parents. My host dad could say sleepy, tired, and hi. And that's it. And that's all I heard him speak for the 2 weeks I was there. My host mom, I never once heard her speak English. And so I relied on the kids. because they had classes in English every day. And so every night around the fire, we would draw in the sand, and I would draw like a house and write the English word house. And they would erase the English word and write the Setswana word. And that's how I kind of learned and communicated with them. But a lot of it was hand gestures and pointing and smiling or frowning and shaking my head, but it worked out. So after the classes, we would usually play with the kids, because around the same time that we got done with our classes, the kids got out of school, and obviously us being the only 8 white people in the entire country, basically, they knew exactly where we were and could find us pretty easily. So they'd all run from their classes into where we were and play with us, basically. And we taught them how to play American football, and we taught them how to play Frisbee, and they taught us a lot. They taught us how to play soccer, because obviously they're a lot better than we are, and different games that they would like to play. And they also really like sweets. A lot of us I took about 4 bags of huge candy, and so they would just run up and be like, sweets, sweets, chompies, chompies. They called gum chompies. And so they'd run up to us and just ask us for it, and we'd have them line up and we would hand them out candy, because that's the only sweet thing they would ever eat. They didn't have really anything else like candy. Not like today where you can go to the gas station and get, chocolate bar. They couldn't do that because they just don't have the money for it. So after that, about the second week, I had the privilege of actually teaching in one of their primary schools, and I got to teach Botswana government. I walked into the class, I thought I was just observing, and the teacher came up to me, he's like, what's your favorite subject? I said, well, history. He goes, okay, and he flips open his content book, and he goes, well, we're right here. Do you think you could teach this? I looked down, it's Botswana government. So I said, sure, why not? So, interestingly, I learned about the Botswana government as I taught it. I kind of wrote up on the board, America, do we have a king, a dictator, or a president? And they're like, president. They all know who Obama is. And they're, okay, Botswana, do you have a king, a dictator, or a president? And they're like, president. I said, okay, yes, good. I had no idea, but the kids did, so that was good. That's how I taught. And then, right at the end of my trip, we got to attend a lot of church services, which was really interesting, because these church services went on for a good 4.5 to 5 hours each. And the whole entire time, it's not just, sermon and prayer, it's singing and dancing. And so at any given time, someone just sitting would start a song, and then everyone else would join in, and then they would get up and start dancing, and everyone else would get up and start dancing. And that's what happened for these 4.5 hours. The sermon itself was maybe 45 minutes to an hour long, and everything else was singing and dancing or praying. And so we had been taught a couple Botswana songs, so we tried to, wow and dazzle the congregation by singing these songs, and obviously they put us to shame when they joined in and they did everything, but that was fun getting to experience what a Botswana church service was like. We also, unfortunately, but fortunate for us, got to attend 2 funerals. The Botswana life expectancy is mid-30s, and it's ranked 2nd in the world for AIDS at 34%. So their life expectancy has dropped from about mid-60s to mid-30s now. So while we were there for the 2 weeks, 2 people died, and we went and attended their funeral. And basically their funeral, they start a week. When the person dies, they have a celebration/mourning period for a week. And then the night before the funeral, the entire family will stay up for 24 hours straight. And they'll start the funeral at about 6 o'clock in the morning. And that they start it at the person's house, and they have a few words said, and the casket's there, and they have the family sitting together, and then they move from there to the gravesite. And at the gravesite, the funeral continues for another about 2 hours, and the hole is dug. And as they lower the casket in, every male member of the community takes turns shoveling in the dirt. And this lasts for about 45 minutes because they're doing it with, tiny shovels. So that was something interesting to see, these funerals that the whole community took part in. And then after that, they go back to the same person's house and they feed everyone that shows up. So that's when I got my first taste of goat. And I passed on the next time. The next funeral came around, and we all passed on the goat. So, and then, yeah. But after those 2 weeks, we left the village of Pittsburgh.